Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Carlos Huereca, Corporate Relocation International CHRO, and I'm thrilled to be here with Auriel Rawlings, a diversity, equity, and inclusion champion and founder. She is currently Global Head of D&I and Partnerships at LBJ Holdings. Auriel, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Carlos.
It's my pleasure. I also want to take a quick moment to thank our friends from the American Healthcare Leader for hosting this interview. All right, let's jump right in. Ariel, why don't we start with the moments in your career that have helped define your leadership style?
Sure, Carlos. So for me, I really like to look at my career, I would say, as a true evolution, and life cycle. When I look at the internships that I held, during my college years, moving on to my corporate career upon obtaining my first role. And initially, these experiences had allowed me to work with some of the best and the brightest minds, as well as leaders in the world. And it was then, I learned that it would be very important for me to truly obtain the strong positive traits that I saw in each of them.